A lot of speculation has gone around about this train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. A lot of conspiracy theories have come out about what's really going on. And it doesn't help that the Biden administration was pretty lame and pretty silent on the Chernobylizing of a small town of less than 5,000 people. The Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, gave nothing but platitudes over the derailment and went on to continue to lecture Americans about how there are too many white people working in construction. But I read a piece today that got me thinking, and this guy just put all the pieces that I already knew together, and it makes one hell of a conspiracy story. I didn't say conspiracy theory. Folks, conspiracies are real. Not all of them are theories. I think this guy is on to something, and I hope he's wrong, because if he's not, then we're in a lot of trouble. Let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the channel where we are the antidote to the daily onslaught of radical woke Marxist propaganda. So, Brent Cates wrote a piece on Substack called America is Under Attack with a subtitle, The Chemical Spill in Palestine, Ohio was done deliberately. Now, before you go off and say this is crazy right-wingers again, the Trump people, those evil MAGA Republicans going off on a tangent, you know, the QAnon Walmart shoppers and all, just give it a listen, okay? I don't buy into conspiracy theories, but I do buy into conspiracy. So Cates starts the piece off asking, how can he know this? He says, how can I know that? He says, because it happened, okay? Here's what he's talking about. He says, and not just this massive deadly chemical spill happened, but it happened on February 3rd, okay? He said, the timing of the event and the nature of it all are all I need, irrationally and emotionally, to look past all of the smoke and the deflection being put out to shine a light onto what just happened to the Ohio Valley water table. He goes on to give his bona fides or bona fides, and he says that these instincts, this discernment, blows past all attempts to hide or explain away what is now obvious. Our nation and its divinely inspired way of life is under a new level of attack. Hear him out, okay? He provides a map of the rivers, okay, in the United States from the Midwest, the East Coast, and the South, okay? He writes, when you appreciate how carefully prepared and placed this accident was, it falls into place. The water and farmland were targeted by a chemical compound that pollutes water at 1 part per million. Almost 1 million pounds of toxic chemicals were spilled. He says summed up equals global elitists who consider themselves untouchable just used their money, influence, and the corruption of everything they touch to touch off that chemical spill to poison the drinking water and farmland of a vast swath of the states of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Now, I know because I looked it up, the Ohio River Basin. All right, there are about 26 million people who living in major cities like Pittsburgh, Columbus, Cincinnati, Louisville, Indianapolis, and Nashville. Now, that river is a source of drinking water for more than 5 million people. 5 million people can't drink that water now, and that was their water supply. Now, Cates provides this photo in his piece, and I had heard a guy call into a talk radio show that I was listening to yesterday, and he said that he was about 10 miles out from where the train derailment happened, and he was sitting at a railroad crossing because the train was going by, and he said he saw all these sparks flying out from underneath the train. It was 10 miles out, folks, and he said that the sparks were so many and so large that it looked like fire. What turns out, it really was fire. Okay, now in this photo, it says that CCTV footage shows that one of the cars was on fire miles before the derailment. Okay, there was a post that went out by an anonymous, and this guy says the same thing that the guy on talk radio that I listened to talked about. It was a thing called PSR, okay? So Joe Biden apparently forced the rail unions to stop striking by threatening them all with prison. Okay, the rail unions were striking in November and December over the PSR, which stands for Precision Scheduled Railroading. And what it meant was it would take jobs away from the union workers. So in other words, it would mean less crews, less maintenance, fewer days off, longer trains, just unsafe business practices, because they say that the hedge funds that owned the railroads, that they would do something with this PSR. They would buy back their own stock and just make fortunes of money. It was all about the money and not about the safety anymore. Okay, so what they're saying here is that on February 3rd, a train was heading from Illinois to Conway Station, and it ran over a sensor that detects the heat of a train wheels and axles, and told them that their wheels were on fire. Okay, and instead of stopping and inspecting and repairing the damage, the crew on the train was ordered by dispatchers to keep going toward Conway. So for over 20 miles until it hit East Palestine, the train was going 30 plus miles per hour with its wheels melting, and they knew it. Folks, if that's true, this is criminal. Now, this may all be why we didn't hear anything and why the media did their best to ignore the story or to try to cover it up and make it seem like the situation wasn't as bad as it really is. Because you have Joe Biden involved. You had unions involved, and many members of the misinformation fake news media are union members and brothers and sisters in solidarity, right? So the question is, could this accident have been the result of union workers who were so angry at this PSR that was going to take away their livelihood potentially, and they wanted the people in charge of things, the movers and the shakers, to see what would happen if the human element was removed from the equation? Now, when you add this to other things that have been going on that the media doesn't want to look like, and comes out and says, oh, there's really nothing to this. This happens all the time. And you're like, wait a minute, if it happens all the time, how come I never heard about it all the time, right? I've talked about this, and so has Tucker Carlson and many others, okay? Many other people have written about it as well. But think about it. There was an escalation of magnitude of a bunch of fires breaking out suddenly at food processing plants all over the country. Well, really all over the world, but in the United States, over the last 3 years, they said there were more food processing plants. I mean, more of them burned down to the ground or exploded to the ground than it would normally happen over a decade, okay? Just last week, we heard of 100,000 chickens that burned to death because a chicken farm or a chicken plant was caught on fire and burned to the ground. And usually what happens is these facilities burn completely down to the ground before the fire people even get there. So we have all these animals being destroyed in fires and explosions, and the government tried to tell us that it was all because of COVID. Do you remember that? Don't blame anything on COVID. They tried to say that the reason these plants burned down was because when there was COVID, there weren't enough government inspectors available to go out to these food processing plants to make sure that they were up to code. I call that a load of horse shit, because that's some radical woke Marxist propaganda right there for you. They expect us to believe that the capitalist food processing plant pig owners were so cheap and they were so into one of making more money for profit that they allowed the very thing that gave them a livelihood, their businesses, okay? They allowed them to burn to the ground because they were so negligent and cheap in keeping up parts to run their business. Load of horse shit. The big three of modern civilization to sustain itself is water, food, and energy, okay? We know that the Biden administration attacked the energy sector from day one when he signed all those executive orders, screwing the oil industry and the coal industry, but really screwing the American people. So that's energy, okay? Our food was attacked by these processing plants being destroyed along with COVID, okay, which kept a lot of workers at home who couldn't work at the processing plants to make it onto the shelves at your local supermarket. And the last thing is water. And look what's happening now. Is what happened in Ohio the beginning of a series of attacks on our water supply? Don't shake it off as crazy conspiracy theory, because look at all the food processing plants that have been destroyed. Over in Europe, they hit the farmers by saying that they couldn't use certain fertilizers because there were certain chemicals in there that went against climate change. In Norway, which is one of the largest producers of food in the world, the farmers revolted against the government because they put them out of business, and they knew that people were going to starve. People can go for weeks without food. A lot of people a lot longer, like this guy, right? So young and healthy people can go a long time with no power. You know, they can function with no power, but people, you can only survive 3 days without water. So the train derails, okay, and there's chemicals on board that are getting out and seeping into the ground, which is bad enough. But then the government, the officials come along 3 days later and they do a controlled burn, making things incredibly worse. Between the ground seepage into the water and the air dispersal of those harmful and deadly chemicals, those things affected millions of people immediately. NPR, the government's propaganda wing, okay, they put out this piece on February 8th, 5 days after the train derailment, saying, headline, residents can return home after crews burn chemicals in derailed tanker cars. 5 days after the worst chemical catastrophe in our nation's history, and the government propagandists were telling people that it was okay to go home? Are you kidding me? Then the eyewitness videos came out on social media and showed how fish were floating belly up in the rivers, how animals were dropping dead all over the area.
Their legs trying to run after the initial derailment. One of his foxes even died.
Out of nowhere, he just started coughing really hard and just shut down, and he had liquid diarrhea and just went very fast.
If regular people were able to see that, then how come these so-called friggin' experts in government told people that they could go home? I guarantee you right now, you're not going to get Michael Regan, who heads up the EPA, to drink any water from the Ohio River anytime soon. If the EPA comes out and says that the East Palestine water is safe to drink, then let's see someone grab a full glass of water from the river and hand it to the EPA director and have him drink it. I'm sorry, folks. This is a conspiracy, but it's not a theory. When something looks really wrong and really out of place and things don't add up, that's when you need to start asking questions. So if you analyze what the Democrats have done to the middle class over the last 5 decades, maybe longer, without the fake news media spin on it, and you just evaluate what they've done, okay, you come away with the feeling that they hate your guts if you're in the middle class. You know, they look down on flyover country people because they think that they are the aristocrats and the rest of us are the peasants. The fact that the government is telling people in Ohio that the air is fine to breathe just days after one of the biggest hazmat spills in history, but for 2 years you had to wear a frickin' mask because of an airborne flu? That is all you need to know about their hatred for you and how stupid they really think you are. All right, so that's it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you in the next one.